Recently on the Reliving the War show that gets uploaded to this channel every week, we arrived at WCW Super Brawl 6 and the infamous Brian Pillman vs Kevin Sullivan respect match. Months before the Clique broke kayfabe in Madison Square Garden, Brian Pillman and head WCW booker Kevin Sullivan came up with a match finish that would completely shatter kayfabe in a way that left fans and WCW employees very confused. Following Super Brawl, Eric Bischoff announced on commentary that Brian Pillman was gone. He was apparently fired from the company following the respect match, and the Horsemen became a trio for a short period of time while Pillman would seek employment elsewhere. Brian showed up in ECW to much fanfare, and today's video will look at this very intriguing and interesting time in the career of Brian Pillman. Pillman's loose cannon gimmick had begun to manifest when Brian joined the Four Horsemen in World Championship Wrestling. The Horsemen and the Dungeon of Doom were trying to come together to erase WCW of Hulk Hogan, but the one man who couldn't keep his cool throughout the whole angle was Brian Pillman. In storyline, Brian had become uncontrollable. The enforcer Arn Anderson would repeatedly have to keep Pillman in check due to Brian's actions becoming a threat to the Horsemen and Dungeon of Doom partnership. Kevin Sullivan, leader of the Dungeon of Doom, would tell Ric Flair and Arn Anderson that Brian Pillman was disrespectful and Brian Pillman was not Horseman material, and it all broke down during a tag team match on Nitro that pitted Double A and Pillman against Kevin Sullivan and Hugh Morris. This match, occurring 1 week before Super Brawl 6, was really strange but oddly entertaining. Pillman and Sullivan refused to sell each other's offense, and later in the match, the two beat the hell out of each other. They were wildly swinging fists at one another, and it really did look like there was some underlying problems between Pillman and Sullivan. What you have to keep in mind throughout most of this video is that it was all a work. It was all scripted to play out as it did, but Brian Pillman and indeed Kevin Sullivan done a lot to make it believable, an art that's seemingly lost in today's professional wrestling. Most of you will know what happened at Super Brawl 6, but as a quick reminder, Brian Pillman and Kevin Sullivan were booked into a respect match. This match was supposed to see both men getting strapped together, and the loser of the match would get beaten so badly that they had no choice but to admit they respected their opponent. The match hardly even began. There was a scuffle between the two before Pillman grabbed the microphone and Brian said, "I respect you, Booker Man," before laughing and leaving the ring. Kevin Sullivan was the head booker of WCW as previously mentioned, but this wasn't common knowledge. Smart fans would have known, dirt sheet readers would have known, but the vast majority of wrestling fans didn't know that Kevin Sullivan was the man booking matches in WCW. Brian Pillman and Kevin Sullivan had broke kayfabe in the middle of the ring on pay-per-view. They were pulling back the curtain to show us that this apparently evil taskmaster was actually a man of significance behind the scenes at World Championship Wrestling, and fans didn't know what to make of it, evident by the silence in the arena after Pillman uttered the infamous line. Remember too that Eric Bischoff's philosophy around WCW creative was to blend reality with fiction. He wanted people to guess what was real and what was scripted, and this was a perfect example of his philosophy put into action. Apparently, there were only a select few people who knew what was going to happen at Super Brawl 6. It's been said too that Brian Pillman took a great deal of pleasure working his peers and making them second guess his intentions and motivations, Pillman's loose cannon gimmick seemingly crossing over into the locker room here. Before and after Pillman's on-screen antics, Brian would tell people different things. He would confuse his co-workers by not admitting what was real and what wasn't, and people had a hard time figuring out Brian Pillman's motivations. Pillman simply worked the boys in a masterful fashion. One of his finest works though came after Super Brawl when he and Eric Bischoff decided that Pillman would leave WCW for a little while to evolve and develop his loose cannon gimmick elsewhere, with the end goal of Pillman coming back to WCW. Bischoff still to this day believes that Brian Pillman was going to come back to WCW following his stints in both ECW and the WWF, and seeing as Brian Pillman was the second man in WWF history to receive a guaranteed contract contract with the organisation. I find that hard to believe, but this really gives us an example of how well Pillman could work people. I'm an Eric Bischoff fan, but I really do think Eric has a hard time admitting that Pillman pulled a fast one on the boss himself, the man who helped develop the loose cannon gimmick and the man who gave Pillman carte blanche to be as unhinged as possible. It's a really fantastic story. Here is Eric's explanation about the whole thing on his 83 Weeks podcast.
The agreement that Brian and I had was, let's play this loose cannon character out, play it out here in WCW, and when it's time to go, it's time to go. Go get yourself over, either in ECW or WWF, wherever you end up, and then let's bring you back. And hopefully when we bring you back, I can justify the money you want. That was it. There was nothing more, nothing less to it than that. And it was a cooperative kind of thing. All we were doing at the point that you're talking about right now was letting that play out.
But
that's
Eric,
all.
Do you realize how stupid that sounds? When you're like, hey, let me get you over so then you can go get over somewhere else and then come back and cost me more money.
Well, it doesn't sound stupid. He didn't want to stay. We weren't going to get him over. He wasn't going to become the loose cannon and then be able to qualify for double the salary.
If things went the way they were initially supposed to, then the angle could have been insanely good. As a long-term story, Pillman would have spent time in ECW completely ripping into his former employers at World Championship Wrestling, while no one knew he was still actually under contract. When Pillman eventually came back to WCW, there would have been a certain amount of credibility to the loose cannon in regards to his uncontrollable character. There would have been a lot more realism to the loose cannon, and there was a natural Pillman versus WCW story to be told here after all was said and done, but of course that didn't happen. Eric Bischoff was also obsessed with beating WWF Raw in the ratings, and this explains why Brian was brought back prematurely before WCW's uncensored 1996 show. It's no secret that Brian Pillman was still on WCW payroll when he showed up in ECW in 1996, and there's even stories of Hulk Hogan wanting Pillman back in WCW for the ill-fated Doomsday cage match at Uncensored, but Pillman refused to go back due to complications with his throat. But who knows, manipulating everyone was really the name of the game here, and no one will really know what was going on inside Pillman's head at the time. It's been reported though that Pillman scheduled a long required throat surgery around the time of Uncensored 96 so he wouldn't get buried by Hulk Hogan on the pay-per-view. Still, WCW pulled the trigger a little early and Brian was brought back while also appearing on ECW television. Brian showed up a few times on WCW Nitro after he was, quote, fired by Eric Bischoff. He could be seen briefly getting pulled by security as he sat front row on the March 11th, 1996 episode of Nitro, and Bischoff even announced that Brian Pillman was in the arena. You can see him only for a brief moment though. And then the following week, Pillman attacked Randy Savage on the outside of the ring during a tag team main event. It was after these appearances that Hogan requested Pillman's inclusion at Uncensored 96 thanks to the buzz Brian had created for himself. All of these events pretty much confirmed that Brian was still getting paid by WCW during this time period though. He was still an employee of World Championship Wrestling, and Pillman and Bischoff's plan of creating this unpredictable lunatic was seemingly all going to plan, at least at the time. As mentioned earlier though, Eric maybe brought Pillman back a little too soon. What's interesting about Brian Pillman's return to ECW is that he didn't wrestle a single match, yet he made so many headlines. Pillman had competed in ECW before, teaming up with Shane Douglas in November of 1994 to take on Ron Simmons and Too Cold Scorpio, but this was a one-off match that occurred during a WCW-ECW talent exchange, a very short-lived WCW and ECW talent exchange. Pillman promised to give Paul Heyman at least one match for free when he returned, and it was supposed to be against Shane Douglas. Paul Heyman said on the ECW Exposed special on the WWE Network, Brian Pillman had an on-air rivalry with Kevin Sullivan, and Kevin and I had always communicated when he was running WCW behind the scenes. So Kevin Sullivan called me and he said, Brian Pillman is going to call you and it's legal for you to take his phone call. We are telling you up front that you can take the call if you want to listen to him. Well, I'd been talking to Brian anyway. Brian calls me and Brian says, hey, I've got this idea, let me run it by you. It would end up with Brian Pillman in ECW, and he said he would give us one match for free. Okay, so now we have the backstory out of the way, let's take a look at Brian Pillman's short yet storied run in 1996 ECW. Just 1 week after the Respect match at Super Brawl 6, Brian Pillman showed up at ECW CyberSlam on February 17th, 1996. The lights in the arena went out while Joey Styles was in the ring, and when they came back on, Pillman was standing there holding his cane out to the audience as the ECW faithful went absolutely nuts. This is probably the moment everyone remembers from Brian's return to ECW, and for good reason too. Brian's promo here was really something else. The fact that some fans brought a sign saying "Pillman, don't work me," that's awesome by the way, but the fact that someone in the audience made this sign tells us that some hardcore ECW fans maybe knew that Brian was going to appear at CyberSlam. Pillman basks in the audience response. He takes his time here and he really does build up anticipation, and then he speaks. Boy, does he speak. Pillman starts off by saying, "Haven't you heard? I just had an announcer in Atlanta take away my constitutional rights. I have been fired by Eric Bischoff. He's a pretty popular guy. He's pretty popular with my legal department as well." Pillman goes on to mock Eric Bischoff by calling him Mr. 90s Whiz Kid and Vern Gagne's former coffee boy. And then Brian drops this.
"You are a piece of fucking shit."
Joey Styles tries to wrap up the interview, but Pillman continues with the profanities before turning heel on the audience. Pillman says that Eric Bischoff is each and every one of these ECW smart marks rolled into one, and yes, he did use the term smart marks. Brian then went on to explain what a smart mark was to the ECW audience, and these fans at the time didn't take too kindly to being ripped apart by the loose cannon. And then it happened. Brian Pillman says he's going to, quote, yank out his Johnson and he's going to urinate in the middle of the ring. Why? I don't know, but man, did this get people talking at the time. Before Pillman can do the deed, Todd Gordon, Paul Heyman and Shane Douglas run down to the ring. Paul tells Brian that this wasn't part of the deal, but Brian tells Paul he'll do whatever he wants before calling Heyman Booker Man. Security come down and it looks like everything is under control, but Brian decides to spit on a fan at ringside, a planted fan by the way. Pillman throws the guy into the ring, he sticks a fork in him a few times, and Shane Douglas runs back in for the save. Absolutely tremendous work here. I'm not sure how anyone couldn't like this. It needs to be seen though, I can't do it justice at all. Go watch CyberSlam 1996 right away. On the February 27th broadcast of ECW TV, we were shown footage of an ECW title match featuring challenger Shane Douglas and ECW champion Raven. Brian Pillman showed up. Pillman had somehow gotten a press pass and he was snapping photos at ringside. Pillman distracted the franchise and the two men had to get pulled apart. What's noteworthy here is that Joey Styles called Pillman WCW's loose cannon, which is a little odd considering Pillman said he was fired a few weeks back. Shane Douglas also called Brian a WCW piece of shit. This brings us then to the March 5th episode of Hardcore TV. Many people will remember this one also. The show starts off inside someone's home. We go down the stairs and there is Brian Pillman arguing with a giant pencil. The pencil, which represented a wrestling booger, wanted Brian to do a job, and Brian said he wouldn't be putting anyone over before he began attacking the pencil. The pencil momentarily gets the better of Pillman. Pillman says he always finds himself fighting with the pencil before he begins choking the pencil out. Brian puts up his four fingers to salute the Horsemen as the short segment comes to an end. ECW's Big Ass Extreme Bash took place on March 9th, 1996, and Shane Douglas would confront Brian Pillman at this very show. Brian Pillman was sat in the audience during a Shane Douglas promo, and Brian started screaming and jumping up and down while trying to get Shane's attention. Shane went down to the guardrail where Brian continued to provoke the franchise, saying that Douglas is nothing but a quitter. He quit WCW, he quit the Dynamic Dudes, and he quit the WWF. Brian says he never quit anything. Pillman gets thrown out of town instead. Shane gives Brian a count to 3. Either Pillman gets in the ring right now or Shane is going to throw him in the ring. At the count of 3, Brian pulled his cousin and her son in front of him. Joey Styles called Pillman a piece of scum before Brian slapped Shane. This led to security coming down and Pillman getting escorted off the premises. Shane was livid. He wanted Brian back, but the show went on without Pillman making a return. The next time we would see Pillman was on the March 11th episode of Nitro that we talked about earlier, so some incredible buzz was getting built around Brian Pillman here. He was making the news and he was the talk of the wrestling world during a time when both WCW and the WWF, the leading companies in the business, were putting on some really poor television. Very soon, Brian would begin talks with the World Wrestling Federation. So here's the 3 biggest wrestling companies in America, and Brian was the centre of attention. Brian Pillman interrupted a match that aired on the March 19th episode of ECW TV. After requesting that Joey Styles comes to the ring to interview the loose cannon, Brian begins talking directly to Shane Douglas while referring to himself as the Rogue Horseman. Shane appeared from the crowd, saying that Brian represents a redneck billionaire from Atlanta, and just as Shane began approaching the ring, Pillman ran away. Shane got into the ring where he declared that Shane Douglas versus Brian Pillman will be a WCW versus ECW bout, and ECW would of course win. A little later on, we saw Brian Pillman working his other job. He was employed as a chef, where he was seen spitting in a salad. So here's where we're at now. Brian Pillman was showing up in WCW, he had a match coming up with Shane Douglas in ECW, and he would eventually be making his way to the WWF. Brian Pillman was making noise not only with wrestling fans, but the people who worked within the business. There's always that feeling that the edge maybe could get taken away from Pillman in the World Wrestling Federation, but I guess we'll never know what the true original plans were for Brian Pillman in the World Wrestling Federation. Paul Heyman said, "Everything that Brian did was designed to make you guess where is the reality and where is the embellishment. Because he protected his business, Brian Pillman had everyone talking about him. He had successfully gotten out of WCW, he was on his way to the WWF, he was about to have a match with Shane Douglas in ECW. Here was a man who was the talk of all 3 promotions and about to make the most money in his career, feed his family, and make enough in a few years to consider retirement. And then..." Brian Pillman fell asleep at the wheel of his Hummer while driving in Kentucky, and he ended up driving into a tree, flipping the vehicle in the process. His foot was twisted a full 180 degrees, his face was shattered, and Brian Pillman was in a coma for a week. Doctors had to fuse his ankle into a fixed walking position, and obviously Brian wouldn't be able to wrestle for a long time. Still, Brian signed with the World Wrestling Federation. Brian was legitimately without a WCW contract by this point, and Brian would get used as a commentator at first in the WWF. Before showing up in New York, Brian made one more appearance in ECW, now in a wheelchair, where he ripped into ECW fans once again while helping and praising Rob Van Dam. The WWF aired a press conference on Raw that announced the signing of Brian Pillman. Brian cried as he said he wasn't sure if he would live or die after the accident, and he said he was appreciative of the World Wrestling Federation for still giving him a chance. When Brian did eventually make it back to the ring, he self-medicated to get by. You can't help but wonder what could have been here. Brian Pillman was on the brink of success. He had created a ton of buzz during a time when wrestling had grown a little stale, and he done it by breaking the mold and being different. It's a common theme in these videos, but it's so true when we consider modern wrestling. Let the talent come up with their own ideas and let them try something that they feel would work, especially in World Wrestling Entertainment. The Loose Cannon was good because Brian believed in it, and it's easier to believe in something you create rather than a vision that someone else has for you. Pillman's character and antics also came about at the right time. Wrestling fans were growing tired of phony characters and colourful ring attires aimed at children. Brian becoming this rebellious and unpredictable loose cannon was a breath of fresh air that worked incredibly well. It's just a shame that the accident put a stop to what could have been a breakthrough gimmick in professional wrestling.